during the broadcast twice, and that was what was driving me nuts, and I am very sorry for that.
Oh, you're
Anyway,
okay.
yep, I'm good now. Everything is good. Um, so what we're going to do is, Ashley, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of your background and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I've got some more questions for you.
Okay. Um, I'm 21. I will be in the fall pursuing my bachelor's degree, and I love to travel in my spare time. It's probably one of my favorite things ever to do. And I also participate in disabled sports, and I've been doing wheelchair basketball and sled hockey for about 10 or so years, if not more than that.
Okay, and then I remember from our discussion earlier that you said you played basketball when you were a little younger before you got too old to qualify to play. And I think
Yes.
that's very cool. Now, and in my situation, my wife travels with a wheelchair, but she's not full time in it. It's kind of she uses a walker if she's not using a wheelchair. So when we travel, she takes the wheelchair because she can use it as a walker or as a wheelchair.
Yes.
For those of you that are want to know more about Ashley, want to connect with her, I've got a link in the description down below to her blog. So feel free to go ahead and click on that link later. You get a chance to read more about Ashley, more of her story. I was very touched when I read her blog. I thought she did a great job.
Thank you.
And there's also a link down below in the description that will take you to the group that we have on Facebook. Ashley's a member of the group, and it's for people that travel with disabilities so that we can share information, try to help everybody in the community. Now,
Yes.
Ashley, why don't you tell us about your last trip? I know it was a cruise. Tell us about it and tell us what some of the challenges were and how you overcame them.
Okay, my last trip before all this virus stuff happened was a Carnival Cruise, and we went on a 4-day voyage to the Bahamas. And one thing I definitely found interesting about the ship we were on, which is the Carnival Liberty, is that it's actually very accessible. If there's an area that like isn't accessible, Carnival will tell you beforehand. That way, you're not surprised or taken off guard by those areas that aren't accessible. Luckily for me, I am ambulatory somewhat, and so I can walk a few feet with assistance. So those areas that weren't handicap accessible, I was able to use those areas if I wanted with assistance. One of the things I found on the ship, however, that was very challenging was that during disembarkation for like the different ports and everything, the individuals working the disembarkation didn't really know where to direct people with disabilities or people in scooters or people that needed a little bit more assistance, because there was only certain elevators that worked for disembarkation day. So those certain elevators, you had to know which elevator to go on to get down, to get off the ship. And we were actually directed wrong at least twice. But that's okay. We eventually found our way and had a good time. But I do think that's something that Carnival maybe needs to work on for the future. That way people don't get like, guided or get lost, because cruise ships are huge. They're huge. So someone could easily get lost on one. That's definitely something I think Carnival needs to work on. But thankfully, we overcame that challenge quite easily. So we had a good time regardless.
Well, very good. And I think that is characteristic, and it's interesting. And I will probably put together maybe an article on that, or a quick show one day, because the that's one thing that all the cruise lines I think could do better, is to share information about which elevators they should plan on using for the various port stops. Because my wife and I have done
Yes.
that too. You wind up you go down an elevator that you think is right and it's not, and then you got to go
Yeah.
up and then find a way to get where you need to go.
Yeah,
So
it's
that's one thing
very.
that
Go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's very interesting because, in all honesty, if you look what I looked around, uh, I didn't really see a lot of individuals in wheelchairs. You know what I mean? Like I saw them on EVCs, in the scooters, uh, but as far as actual like wheelchairs, I didn't see that many. Uh,
Yeah,
Go
and I
ahead.
think that's typical too, because I think people that need mobility assistance and they're going to be on a cruise ship, a lot of times they'll spend the money to rent a scooter just because it makes life a little easier for them.
Yes, for sure. I definitely support that 100%.
Okay, so now you told me that on your when you went to Nassau that you found a really accessible shore excursion. You want to tell us about that and what made it so accessible?
Yes, I did. Uh, After countless hours of trying to find a handicap accessible shore excursion, we only found, I think, one or two shore excursions that said handicap accessible shore excursion. And they were either walking tours, or I think they were only walking tours actually. Uh, but after much research, we found Blue Lagoon Island. It's actually about 30 minutes away from the main island. And what I loved about it is not only were the individuals working on the island so nice and amazingly helpful, they were also very informative about the island itself and how they came to make it as accessible as it is. And why I find it so accessible is that besides the sand, which they had a beach wheelchair to help anybody who wanted to, venture out on the sand that needed a little bit more assistance. Besides the sand not being um, wheelchair friendly as far as for my manual wheelchair, literally almost every single part of the island was concreted. It had no humps or lisps that you needed to get over. Um, so it was really nice to be able to just roll like on a flat surface all throughout like what we were doing. Because usually when I travel places, and I travel a lot due to disabled sports, you don't really find places that are like 96% wheelchair friendly. And I say 96% because the only spot that we found that I could not um, access is on the other side of the island. There was the ocean, and there were steps to get down to the ocean side, to get a better, view and stuff like that. And unfortunately, I did not get to go down and admire from a close proximity, only because we would have had to have left my chair up on like the bridge that you walk over to get to the ocean side. And we just didn't want to do that. So we admired from a distance, which was fine. And in all honesty, it was my favorite shore excursion that I've ever been on, actually.
Well, very cool.
Yeah, I've never been on a shore excursion, so I should say that's my first one.
Okay. Well, and it's interesting. One of the things, and you and I were talking beforehand, we've done private islands with Norwegian Cruise Lines, and they do a really good job with their shore excursions. And well, let me take it back. With their private islands, are being very accessible, works very well. We also did I did a private island tour with the MSC in March, and that island is going to be amazing. The accessibility is tremendous. I don't know that you could find a better place for accessibility. They did a good job. They had lots of beach wheelchairs. They had really nice beaches and easy access where it rolls down easily to get to the water.
Oh, wow.
So those kinds of things were really nice. The only downside to it's Ocean K is the name of it. The only downside right now is all the palm trees and things they've planted are really young. When the trees start to mature a little bit and there's more shade, it's going to be amazing.
Oh, yeah.
But one of the things, and that was kind of what started my experience with this channel, was we wanted to know about beach wheelchairs on Harvest Key, and that information wasn't available anywhere. And I'm pretty good at finding stuff on Google, and it just wasn't there. Okay, so
Yeah.
let's talk about flying, because I'm sure for you it's a challenge. I know with my wife we run into challenges flying. So what are some of the things that you find challenging, and how do you deal with them?
Well, we fly a lot, especially when my hockey season begins. Most of our tournaments and stuff are out of state, so we do travel a lot. One of the things that I find not really challenging, but more of like stuff that they can do better on, is security, security pat downs, because I do use a chair full time. My chair cannot fit through the metal detector that you're required to go on or in, so I have to get a private pat down each time, and it's something that I think employees need to be trained on more, because, like, for example, there was one instance where we waited almost an hour for someone to come and do a pat down with me, and we almost missed our flight. I think that, I don't know if people just don't really get a lot of private pat downs, or aren't used to patting people down in wheelchairs. I mean, honestly, my chair has been broken a lot through the airline, which is very challenging, especially when you use a chair full time. It's very disheartening when you get off a flight and your chair is broken. Thankfully, though, the airline has always been very understanding and has always helped us fix my chair whenever it gets broken. I don't really think I've ever encountered a challenge besides the security. But for anybody who has any doubts about the security or can't, go through it for, maybe they have autism and large crowds, aren't really a safe place for them staying in line. There is a program called TSA Cares where a representative will come get you at the check-in stand inside the airport and escort you through security. That way you won't have to deal with the long lines and everything like that. We've never tried it ourselves yet, but we're planning on giving it a shot when we travel again in the future.
Yeah, it was interesting. My wife and I experienced their help on our last trip when we in January when we went on our cruise, I was very surprised at how effective and how helpful they were because too many times I think we have a negative impression of TSA, but the people that we dealt with were really super. Yeah, I
Yeah,
understand what you're saying about breaking wheelchair. My wife, I just had to order handles to replace on her wheelchair because they got broken, and it's a challenge. The one thing that my wife and I guess I would share this as a tip. I'm getting ready to ask you about your tips,
okay.
but my wife, one of her challenges is that she's also claustrophobic. So the one thing that she's got to make sure that she does is use the restroom before she gets on the plane, because if it's a long flight and she needs to use the restroom, it then becomes a problem because that little room is really a challenge for
Yeah,
her.
yeah, I'm not claustrophobic myself, but my grandmother is. She gets claustrophobic even in elevators. So, um, and since we do fly a lot, she definitely has to make sure that she takes care of like everything she needs to do before the flight. That way, I think being in a plane freaks her out anyway. Um, so she tries to avoid any more small spaces than she needs to. Um, her claustrophobia is really bad. So she
Yeah,
tries.
and
Go
see, and
ahead.
that's interesting because that is actually a disability in and of itself. And too many times we think about the physical disabilities, we don't think about the invisible disabilities. But
Yes.
and going back to that, one of the challenges we run into is elevators on the cruise ship. Because sometimes you're there in your wheelchair, and 900 people want to crowd into the elevator with you, and we've gotten to the
Yes.
point that sometimes we get her on the elevator, and then I stand in the doorway with my elbows out until the door shuts.
Yes. That's what my nanny does. She's like, I mean, you know, cruise ship elevators are nothing like I've ever experienced before. Like you have a zillion other elevators, uh, but yet when you know people see a wheelchair come, either they step in front of you or they. I've had people climb over me for to get in the elevator, and I'm shy in nature, so I don't really say anything. But my grandmother, she will literally stand in front of the elevator, until it closes, you know, or she'll tell people, hey, do you not see a wheelchair here? Can you not say excuse me or something? Like, common courtesy, you know, she's very good about that.
Yeah. Okay, so let me go ahead and ask you. Why don't you give us your five top tips for traveling with a wheelchair?
Okay. The first tip I thought of actually just now as we were talking is definitely make sure that you take photos of your chair before and after the flight. Definitely before. That way you will know if anything gets broken, or you have documentations to show, hey, my chair wasn't like this before I got on the flight, or hey, you guys scuffed my foot plate. Here's the documentation to prove it. Documentation, we've learned, is very important, especially when traveling like with airlines or cruise ships. You don't really have to worry about documenting because you're not, at least in my case, you're not leaving your chair anywhere. My chair goes in my room with me, so we don't leave it out in the open anywhere. But like if you have a collapsible chair or something, I would definitely, take pictures of that just in case something was to happen or something like that. That way you can always have, proof. Because without proof, especially with airlines, it's very difficult to prove that your chair or another mobility aid wasn't like that before you boarded, a flight or a cruise ship, or any form of transportation where you have to leave your chair behind. My second tip would definitely make sure everything is set and ready to go before you travel. So, for example, we booked our cruise last November. And since then, we have made 100% sure that our room is what we booked. We made sure that it's handicap accessible. Just make sure that everything is the way you booked it, because I know, accidents can happen and things don't get entered correctly. And the last thing you want to do is show up somewhere that you're really excited to go to and then have mishaps or setbacks because, they accidentally booked you in the wrong room, or this wasn't, the handrails weren't, in the room even though it advertised it. Definitely make sure, especially if you need handrails and things of that nature, definitely like triple check before you go, just to make sure everything is set and ready to go, if that makes sense.
Nope, it did. And one of the things you have to be watchful for too, along those same lines, is we were on a cruise on Norwegian, and they upgraded us out of a handicap cabin into a better floor, but a regular cabin. And then I had to be very persistent and negotiate with, because there wasn't room in the cabin. Literally wasn't room to put my wife's collapsible wheelchair in the cabin with
Wow.
us and be able to get out. So yeah, you want to make sure that you check those kinds of details. Go ahead. Number
Yes.
3.
Number 3 is never be afraid to, like you said, if something isn't right, or something isn't, to your specification, definitely advocate for it, because cruise lines, nor anywhere you go, will know that it's wrong unless you say, hey, this is wrong. How can we fix it? That is something we learned very quickly is very important, especially when you have a wheelchair, because even though I don't need a fully accessible hotel room or fully accessible cabin when I travel, uh, there definitely needs to be space to where I can move around. Uh, like, for example, on cruise ships, I do need a fully accessible cabin because, like you said, if you don't get an accessible cabin, then the chances of a chair fitting is very slim. Uh,
Yeah, non-existent.
yeah, yeah, definitely non-existent. Like my my grandfather had a regular interior room, and my wheelchair couldn't even fit through the door of it. Um, but definitely advocate for, what your needs are. If it's not, like it's advertised or like it's described, because that's very important. Because, for example, not having a fully accessible room could really hinder or even be dangerous for somebody who needs a fully accessible cabin, um, or a hotel room. So if it's not um, like you booked, definitely say something, because people won't know unless you tell them about it. Uh, and it gives them an opportunity to learn for the new people that come that might have the same needs. So that's really important, I feel like.
Yep, I would agree. And the one thing that we found is you can be polite and still be firm. And if you're polite
Yes.
and firm, you get pretty good results. If you start screaming and yelling, then you lose any chance to get anything you need. It's
Yeah.
just be polite and firm.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, tip number 4.
Okay. Tip number 4 is uh, this is one that we found extremely important, especially if you have a lot of medical equipment and stuff like that, like I do. Uh, we just found this out a few years ago. Is that, like, on Southwest Airlines? I'm not sure about other airlines, but on Southwest, medical equipment flies for free, uh, and it doesn't hinder the two bag policy. So if you have uh, like a feeding pump or extra wheelchair supplies or parts that you need to bring in case something breaks or something like that, then definitely let the airline know that you have medical equipment, and they should definitely let you check those bags on for free. Um, and if I'm not mistaken, there's no weight limit. I have to check that out, but I'm pretty sure there's no weight limit.
Okay. Yeah, and that is pretty much universal. I think it's a requirement for all airlines. I know, like I said, we've that's a question that winds up, you have to answer. And I think a lot of people don't realize that if you say yes, you have medical equipment, that then you can have an extra bag for free.
Yeah, that's one of the downsides, I think. Uh, but uh, number 5, I think, is one of my favorite ones, and that is, if you're looking to go on a short excursion but don't know which ones are. So I was checking my phone battery. If you're looking to go on an excursion and don't know which ones are accessible, oh, honestly, we didn't know Blue Lagoon was as accessible as it is, uh, until we spoke to, like, Carnival and stuff like that. So just because the short excursion doesn't say handicap accessible in the description or in the title, definitely check it out, because we realized that most shore excursions don't have that in their description. So just definitely double check on that, especially if it's an excursion that you are very interested in, because I've learned some shore excursions will surprise you with how accessible they are, even though it doesn't say in their description that they're handicap accessible.
Yeah, and the one thing I would suggest along those lines too, to kind of add on to that, is sometimes if you just call where the destination is and talk to the property itself or email them, you can get, because like I said, the cruise lines descriptions for the most part are not particularly helpful. But if you reach out to, like in your case, reach out to Blue Lagoon, a lot of times you'll find better answers. And that, in one of the things that I do in this channel is I do research to try to help find those excursions. I've been interviewing people and talking to people in different ports just to see what is available, that is accessible. And like I said, it takes some time and energy and some work, but there are, in a lot of places, some pretty nice accessible excursions. I thought we had one comment I wanted to share. Pam Wheatley is in the comments, and she mentioned that she went to Banya Beach in Rotan and went snorkeling, and there was somebody that stayed and helped her pretty much the whole day. And she said she had to be pulled through the water, and he worked hard, but they did a lot of other really nice things to help her. And then she said she went 3 times for an hour at each time. So that was pretty nice for somebody to be willing to do that. And again, we find with our travels with Cheryl's Wheelchair that in general, most people try really hard to be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think we've come across anybody that has been, intentionally rude or, demeaning or anything like that. They've mostly been extremely kind and ready to, see how they can help. And I think that's very kind of people to want to do that.
Yep, it is. Listen, I've kept you a long time tonight. I know you have family there and you have a family celebration. So we're going to go ahead and we'll call it a quits here. I do have a question of the day down below. So for those of you that are watching on the replay or watching now, I just ask for you to let me know how many of you have family that travel and what questions would you like answers to. So if you're watching on the replay, down in the comments, you'll see that. I'd appreciate your answers. I appreciate all those that we had, Pam and Travels with Angie and Julie Goodman, Pam Wheatley. I'm trying to see who else was all here. Judy Goodman was here. Robin Adams was here. So thank you all for being here. I really appreciate you being part of the live. I appreciate you being here very much, Ashley. And I'm going to pop up one more slide. And hopefully that popped up. Anyway, so, and I've just messed it up completely. So let me go back to pop up my screen, add it to the stream. Okay. And what you'll see is on the replay, there'll be a suggested video. And if you haven't subscribed and liked the channel, I would sure appreciate it. So let me pop this up here. There we go. That was the one I wanted. Anyway, thanks everybody. I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody being here that was there. I appreciate you so much, Ashley. Thanks for being a guest. You've been a really kind guest. And we'll see you guys next time.